Okay, so, all right, well, why don't we get going? So first, let me, first, hi, Tim, how are you doing? Just want to thank all of you for joining us and giving us a chance to talk about our pilot studies program. I'm also assuming that many of you have already applied for pilot studies. You may have some people who have already gotten awards or are interested in getting uh, in submitting your studies. So I'm glad to have you with us, and we'll go through, we'll discuss the pilot studies, what we're looking for, and then we're always happy to not just take Q&A now, but if you have questions after, just shoot us an email, and we're happy to try to discuss your research with you and see if it's a good fit for pilot studies. So next slide, please. Okay, so our goals are unchanged. They're really allied with the entire CTSI to support pilot studies to develop innovative approaches to solve clinical and translational research. All of our work right from the inception has been to fund translational research. We're going to get a little bit later into the distinction between translational research and translational science. We want to address gaps in the field. So if there are clinical and translational problems, the pilot studies program is very focused on research that will identify why problems occur and ways to try to overcome them. Our experience over several years now has been very successful in terms of cross-disciplinary collaborations. There are so many successful collaborations that come to mind. They involve people from very different disciplines. It could be anything from cancer screening to engineering to microbiology and immunology, to community-based research. So it's really neat when you see people from these different disciplines coming together and applying for and getting pilot studies funding. Part of the cross-disciplinary collaboration and something we very much encourage is when at least one of the PIs is senior. So we define senior based on having success getting NIH grants or equivalent. And that person is paired with a junior person or junior people. And then what happens is you have built-in mentoring. So when it comes time to larger grants, the person with more experience is often an important force. So you have built-in mentorship into the collaboration. And then we want to create a context for innovation in translational science across the Buffalo Translational Consortium. So in many ways, we think of the pilot studies as a quintessential incubator. So these are meant to be new ideas. Sometimes these ideas are very much, they're seed funding. So they're early stage projects, and built into our pilot studies program, we look at innovation, and we've been very successful at having pilot studies that were real innovators in their fields. Next, please. Okay, so this is translational science that we want to describe. And to be honest, I've spent my own research career doing translational research, and I needed to learn a little bit about what is translational science as defined by NCATS. So NCATS is the institute that funds CTSAs, and their former director, Dr. Austin, wrote a paper on the importance of translational science, and he defined it as bringing predictivity and efficiency to the development and dissemination of interventions that improve health. And really, in terms of the gap, so we meaning so many fields in laboratory research, population science research, clinical trial research, we've been very successful in terms of new discoveries. These are new discoveries in the lab, new discoveries in population sciences, new clinical trials. The New England Journal of Medicine and is just, every week there's, clinical trials that change standard of care in different fields. The concern is that this has not led to expected therapeutic benefits to public health. So it may be that specific people have benefited from this clinical research, but when you look at public health broadly defined, it hasn't reached the benefits that we had hoped to achieve. And this, by the way, was written sort of at the time that COVID came. So with COVID, it obviously creates multiple other challenges for translational science. But the goal is that translational science is really designed to address this gap and to bring these discoveries to disseminate them and to ultimately bring them to a point where you have measurable public health benefit. Next, please. So it's meant to take scientific discoveries made in the lab or clinic, I would also say population sciences, and to transform them into new treatments and approaches to medical care that improve the health of the population. Next, please. So that's translational research, which we do routinely, which many of us do. Now, what is the distinction between that definition of translational research and translational science? So translational science is focused on understanding each step of the translational process and to expedite translational research where we bring these discoveries to the patient, and I would say not just the patient, but when we talk about public health in general, we could say the broader community. So how do we take what we have learned and publish in scientific journals and make it more actionable to improve public health of our community? Next, please. So what do we do in terms of our pilot studies program? A core part of this is the review and fund pilot studies. So we issue the RFPs, we make modifications in the RFPs. We go through the steps I'm going to walk you through a little bit later, where we do an initial review and then a more involved review, and ultimately select the pilot studies that are to be funded. And then we follow it carefully. We want to follow the progress of the research. We also want to follow the progress of the researcher in terms of papers, grants, promotion. We also conduct an annual pilot studies colloquia where people who are recently funded present their results. The people who were funded the 2 years before present it as a full oral talk, and then others who are more recently funded with more initial data present it electronically. And then every 2 years, we have a workshop on creativity and innovation with different themes. Next, please. All right, let's get to the pilot studies. So the first part is an RFP, request for proposals. This involves a letter of intent, okay? And then from the letters of intent, we select those who we want to give, who we invite those who we select for a full proposal. So we have an executive committee that reviews and prioritizes the LOIs. We typically invite 25 for full proposal submission. And then to reduce the chance of bias, we have a reciprocal relationship with Penn State, where we review their applications and they review ours. We then have the full reviews in front of us, and the executive committee reconvenes again. We look at each of the comments that the outside reviewers have made. We also make our own decisions about first of all, the quality of the reviews, especially if there's discordance between reviewer one and reviewer two. We also evaluate the fit of the proposal with the CTSI, and we ultimately make a consensus decision on which grants to fund. Typically about a dozen per year, and the average level of funding is, again, it says between 25 to 50K. Generally in the 35 to 40K range would be average. Next, please. So these are the pilot studies leadership team. So just go back one slide. I forgot to mention. Okay. So I apologize. Just one more ahead. I apologize. Okay, Aaron, I'm driving you crazy. Just go back one. So this is a multidisciplinary team. It's made, and we've expanded this team, and it includes people who are lab researchers. It includes Katya Noyes, who's sort of a team science lead. Albert Titus is in chair of medical engineering. Joe Balthazar is in pharmacology and therapeutics. So I think we've got ourselves a good group of people, because we picked this group, or this group evolved because of the nature of the publications. I'm sorry, the nature of the applications we get. So, for example, a lot of very successful ones were in biomedical engineering. So this is where we needed Dr. Titus's expertise. So I think, and our plan going forward is actually to include a layperson from the community to provide their input as well, so that we're really in sync with what with research that will be impactful for our community. Next, please. So what do we evaluate? So always scientific merit and innovation, that goes without saying. We want to address significance and impact to the field. We do look at the impact on specific groups based on different ages, special populations, underserved populations. This is a big part of the UB CTSI to address healthcare disparities. So we look at those pilot studies proposals favorably. We look at the team science. Again, as I said before, many of our most successful applications were people from different disciplines, and also people who created new research teams with community members. We look at the budget as well, and we also, this is a criteria that we use and that were evaluated by the return on investment in terms of extramural funding, and specifically federal funding. Next, please. So again, these are funding priorities. They deal with healthcare disparities within our region and the nation, overcoming translational research obstacles. This is not a requirement in any way, but we look favorably on applications that pair early stage with established investigators, so you have a built-in mentoring system. And as I've said before, we've had many successful multidisciplinary collaborations, true team science. These have been collaborations at the interdepartmental level, at the school level, at the institutional level. And some of the most positive grants have been putting people together with completely different disciplines of expertise. And then we, as I said before, we want a clear plan for extramural funding, such as an NIH grant or equivalent, and including one of the NCAT CTSA program funding mechanisms as well. Next, please. So this is our return on investment. And first thing I'd mention is the CTSA funding has been $200K per year. The 2019 to 20 gap was during the no-cost extension period. but double that amount, 400K per year, is internal support. And if we just go, and on the right side is the number of awards per year, again, in the range of 10, 11, 12 would be about our average per year. Next, please. So then in terms of who our partners are, that includes funding from the provost, from the VP for Research and Economic Development, from the VP for Health Sciences, the Dean of Multiple Health Sciences Schools, Roswell Park, and the School of Engineering. Now, as far as CTSA funding going forward, that part is going to be dedicated to translational science projects. So all of it has to have a translational research component. But as we define translational science, this is per CTSA policies, that 200K that we get from the CTSA will go to translational science projects. With the internal support, the 400K, we have more flexibility. It always has to be translational research, but we have more flexibility. So we welcome translational science projects for sure, but we would not limit our internal funding to only those that qualify as translational science. They have broader translational research that we have funded in the past. We'll continue to do that in the future as well. Next, please. So here's a pilot studies vignette. We change these each year, so I want to tell you about the work of Dr. Lise Kaler. So we funded a grant from her. She's a clinical professor of Department of Surgery with expertise specifically in organ transplantation. And she submitted a study on feasibility of an e-health educational intervention for African Americans with end-stage kidney disease. What was the gap of that? So the gap is, even though African Americans disproportionately have higher incidence of kidney disease and kidney failure, they're underrepresented as far as kidney transplant recipients. So Dr. Kaler wanted to have a better educational tool available. And also, since living donor kidneys in general do better than cadaveric, that is also something that she wanted to increase the pool of living donor kidney transplantation amongst the African American community. So she was awarded a pilot study. Her work has actually led to a number of publications. We list one, but it's actually been a number of publications from the pilot studies. And then she was awarded this provide prelim data for an R01 with the aim of increasing live donor kidney transplantation through education. Next, please. So in terms of publications, this is the way we judge our return on investment. So one is simply looking at number of peer-reviewed publications. So you see pilot studies awards, and then from our inception of 2015 until now. And these peer-reviewed publications are cumulative. So if you're awarded a grant in 2018, but your publication that was supported by pilot studies came out in 2021, that's credited to your 2017 pilot studies. These are cumulative levels. And when you look at 2021, 22, 23, we're still very early for those cycles. So we expect that will go up. Next, please. And then in terms of financial return on investment, so you could see this is in terms of extramural funding. And again, there's going to be a gap between when you get your pilot studies versus a successful federal grant. So, from 2021, 22, 23, this is the data that we don't have any data on. But you could see that the overall return of investment, the total amount extended was 5.2 million. And the amount that that was garnered in terms of extramural funding was over 36 million. So that's very respectable return on investment. Next, please. And then when you look at the number of, so this is just in terms of the 2022 pilot study. So we had a little more than 40 LOIs, approximately 25 full proposals were invited, and 13 were funded. And then if you look at the proportion that are either cross-disciplinary or involving healthcare disparities, and you can obviously have both. An application can both involve health disparities and be cross-disciplinary. You see, it's really a majority. So this is exactly what we are hoping for. Next, please. Okay. So then going into this year, again, the RFP was released in March 2022. We had our informational session about a year ago. We got 31 letters of intent, 25 full proposals. We had our exchange of reviews, and then we met as a group in November, selected the proposals, and as of January 2023, that was the award start date. Next, please. And then we have our pilot studies colloquium. These are held in December. We have the oral reports, so oral presentations from the 2020-21 pilot studies recipients, so from 2 years, 1 to 2 years before the, and then the more recent cycle would provide poster presentations along with the oral presentations. We had, if I recall correctly, 2 different presentations from seed grant awardees. So these are much smaller grants that are community focused. I had given my talk on tips for success in obtaining pilot studies funding. And again, like our tradition, we'll continue to do this in December. So our next meeting for the colloquium will be sometime in December of this year. Next, please. Next. Okay, so we want to move forward. A lot of things I think we've done right. We present our plan and our vision to our external advisory board. They come with very constructive comments, but I think the general sense has been that we've done a good job and should continue to build on our strengths. So they include a focus on innovative methods and technologies to address gaps, significant healthcare problems and gaps in care, and then an emphasis on underserved population and disparities within Western New York, which is on average a population that has substantial levels of poverty. We are continuing to build our team science approach and to focus on proposals that address innovative questions and propose innovative solutions. Next, please. So we've had a strong return on investment. It's something we continue to follow. We will, as we said before, we've already begun to expand research and patient and community engagement to support these with small grants to increase participant accrual. Next, please. So as I mentioned before, the translational science, again, I hope I made a reasonable distinction between translational research and translational science. So the funding that we get for the CTSA, the $200K per year, will be dedicated towards translational science. We have, and then we have internal funding where we're a bit more flexible to broadly include translational research. We do want to enhance inter-CTSA hub collaborations with a focus on underserved populations and healthcare disparities, and for that to lead to future collaborative NCATS applications. We'll continue our reciprocal review with Penn State. For those not funded, we provide investigators formally or informally with a request for CTSI service, and I'd highlight the work that's been done over the years now very successfully by BIRD, by our biostatistics core, where people can meet with biostatisticians. We call it kind of like a napkin service where it doesn't have to be fully formed ideas, but you can sort of explore your ideas with the statistician. And our experience has been that applications, that one of the reasons why applications may not be funded is there's an inadequate statistical analysis. So I would, if your study does involve an element of statistics, I would say involve a statistician early. I think it will enhance the likelihood of success. Next, please. And then our creative service workshop. So that is every 2 years. And the last was in 2021, and it was built on the idea of remote involvement in clinical trials. Obviously, this was motivated by the COVID pandemic, and Larry Hawk continued to be one of the leaders, but we had a number of leaders in the field. This included Dr. Perez Stable, who's the director of the NIH. Director of the NIH National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, who was a speaker. And this was very successful, 300 registrations, about 47% attended and engaged amongst the CTSA network, 32 hubs. So this is what we want to continue to do and build on. Next, please. And then, this is sort of putting this diagram, this visual sort of shows a central part of the CTSI within the broader Buffalo Translational Consortium. So includes all of the UB and all of its its schools. It includes major hospitals. It includes major research facilities such as Houtman Woodward, and also commercial and state partners as well, and community partners, sort of kind of all coming together to enhance health research. And we hope very much that the pilot studies program is, again, as I mentioned before, not just a reflection of this, but a driver of the innovation that characterizes our CTSI. So with that, I think I'm going to stop, and I'm happy to take any questions in whatever format you like. I couldn't have made that all clear. That was.
Well, I think you did, Bram. Let me just say two things to emphasize two things that Bram said, and that is, reviewing these, Bram and I've been doing this for a long time. The two biggest things that sync a letter of intent and a proposal are, one, if it's not translational. So we get a number of basic scientists who just, repurpose something that they have and put it in there. So we want to make sure that this is going to lead to something that will, improve healthcare eventually. So, and it's got to be, you can argue that anything you do in basic science ultimately will, but there's got to be a link. And number two is your plan for extramural funding. So we get a lot of, and we will use the preliminary data that we generate from the pilot study to submit an R01, period. Not good enough. If you can say, what the grant's going to look like, if you could even say, the three aims of the grant are A, B, and C, and this will contribute critical preliminary studies that we need for AIM 2. Give us something of substance so that, you actually have more than just whatever comes out. We're going to figure out how to submit an R01. And that's probably the biggest. Well, they're both. Those are two important things.
Okay, Erin, let me just ask you, is there anything in the chat box that,
I have not seen anything in the chat box pop up.
okay, I
Actually,
think,
maybe one just did.
yeah, I just saw one check go as well. What question for clinical research studies? Is it a requirement to be prospective pilot study showing collaboration between departments, or retrospective pilot studies are sufficient? So I would say in general, a retrospective study that's a chart review is just not likely to do well. It just, and I believe me, I'm not saying that that it's not useful information, but just in terms of the innovative part and saying, we are going to just kind of look back and see what we find retrospectively. I don't think we've ever funded a pilot study like that. Now, when you say prospective, it certainly does not need to be interventional. And a perspective could be an analysis of perhaps some existing database that it could be a deep sort of big data analysis, but it shouldn't be something like a chart review. That is just won't go. Yeah, so retrospective, I guess it depends on what defines. If it's retrospective chart review, no. But if it's something more innovative, like some sort of a big data, let's see, can you hang on a second? So it's we'll get. Did I explain that reasonably before I move to a second? Oh, the question is to get the preliminary result from registries, example, health disparities. That my advice in general is probably start doing the data mining as prelim data, because it just to try to pull that information from registries. And if that's the major focus of the grant, I don't think that that's going to be successful. My sense is if it's going to be retrospective, show something new, important, unexpected, and maybe a way to perhaps validate it independently, but just simply an exploratory look retrospectively, I don't think so. What do you think about that, Tim?
I agree with that. I think you said it very well. For example, if you could make a case that the analysis that you're going to do is going to be critical to do the prospective study that you want to do, if you can link it to something else, but a straight out retrospective study it's really based on impact. I mean, retrospective studies just don't have the impact of prospective studies. So we would rather have preliminary studies that lead to a prospective study than simply a retrospective study.
Okay. Now, there's another question. I hope I haven't overlooked one, but I'm going to get to Julie Bowker's question. I just want to make sure I haven't missed any. Okay. If we are a basic researcher interested in moving into translational research, would it make sense, be okay to collaborate with a more junior person with clinical translational research experience? I am a senior researcher, but without much translational research experience. Absolutely, yes. But remember, the product, the application at the end has to be translational. So if you come from a pure basic science, like you are looking at you spent a lot of time looking at one signaling pathway, which is really important. You want to, but it's not translational. Now you have a new collaboration. It doesn't need to be with someone junior. It could be junior, but it doesn't have to be. And now you want to take this in a new direction that's translational. I would say absolutely yes. But again, the end product that you apply for has to be translation.
And Kathleen Parks, you have your hand up. So
I saw her too. Hi.
Hi, thank you. For those of us who are more psychosocial researchers, you started off by saying that the applications that are most successful are more biomedically based. So of course that concerns me. And so I guess my question is, of course, there are a lot of health disparities in mental health in addictions. So my question is, do we have to have some biological endpoint? So
No. No. Okay, so that was, so actually, if I did give that impression, let me try to correct it. It does not need to be biomedical. We've had some very successful biomedical ones, but and it doesn't need to be. In the vignette that I gave you was entirely based on education. I mean, it addressed a problem in terms of live renal donors, and it was entirely outrage education based. So no, it absolutely does not. It does not need to have a test tube. It doesn't need to have a gel. It doesn't need to. It could be more health focused than on a specific disease. It could absolutely be mental health focused. It could be, yeah. I mean, I just read our Surgeon General, whose name I forget, Dr. Murthy. He just wrote a New York Times op-ed the other day on loneliness being a healthcare risk. And he talked about his own loneliness. So if there's something that you want to talk in terms of mental health on on individual patients, population, social psychology, all of this is like super welcome.
And Kathleen and others, I put a link in the chat that shows all the past pilot studies from 2015 to the present. You can look at the titles and you'll see it just supports the point that Bram made about we do lots of behavioral and related pilot studies.
Okay. Dr. Lally?
Hi, thank you. I had a few questions related to COIs and how COIs can be listed on the project. First, we have an outgoing PhD student he just defended, and we were wondering if we could list him as a COI, even though he will be starting his postdoc in Florida in the fall. Can he still be included in this grant as a COI?
I think it's an interesting question. So he will not have, he won't have, he won't be a faculty member at that point.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't think, my sense is probably not COI status. Are you thinking that any funding would go outside of UB to what he's doing in Florida, or he's more of like of a consultant role, or like what would his role be? Let's put it that way.
Our research is really looking at food access interventions within the HIV patient community, and his dissertation was largely on on that topic. So we wanted to include him in the writing and planning of this grant, as well as have him on as more of a consultant for the duration of the grant itself.
Without any salary support, correct?
I don't believe so, no.
Because we have, it's typically faculty, and we it's also the pilot studies, because they're limited, they're not used for faculty salary support. My certainly for PIs, but my recollection for COIs is that they should be faculty. So Aaron, do you concur or not concur?
They don't have to be faculty to be included as co-Is. I think it's a lot of time to the PI's discretion. It's just that all of the co-investigators listed will have to provide their biosketch.
Okay. So again, if I understand this particular person, there would be no salary support. He'd be participating in writing up the proposal, but his salary support would be at his new position, right?
Correct. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would also just give a little bit of advice on that. Since he is a postdoc at another center, you don't want to have a big role for him, because he has a new position that he has to do, and he's not faculty. So I would my advice, for what it's worth, sure, include him in the process of writing, but I would not highlight his role, because again, he has a different job. He has a different boss. He has a different mentor.
All right, that makes sense. And if I can just build off of that COI question, we were planning to work with some clinics, and could we include someone from ECMC as a COI? Like a physician with an appointment at UB, would that make the most sense? Is ECMC a member of the CTSI?
Yeah.
Consortium? Okay, perfect.
Oh, totally.
Mhm.
Totally. Totally. I mean, if you look at the last slide, absolutely.
Okay, great. And then it would be preferable then if they had an appointment at UB, if it was a physician, or just since ECMC is part of that ecosystem.
My sense is they probably do.
Right.
Like if you look at it, my sense is that they probably do, but yeah, I mean, if they're at yeah, just look them up on the web, but I have
Okay.
a feeling that they would be.
Perfect.
But they don't have to. They don't have to.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Dr. Nwagu?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Well, I had a couple of questions, but I guess one I might have missed at the beginning is the relationship between CTSI, CTSA, and the participating institutions. So you mentioned Penn State, you just mentioned ECMC. Like, how is all of this connected?
Okay, so Penn State has a very specific role. They're an independent, independent
Evaluator.
CTSI. All we do is we swap reviews. So that's one thing.
Okay.
Now, separate from that, we do want to have inter-hub collaborations that involve research. So that's different than swapping, than reciprocal reviews. But now if we look at our CTSI, so CTSI is what has been built here, and the CTSA is kind of the funding mechanism. Okay. So our CTSI is led by Tim. He's the PI. And then we have a number of people on the steering committee, a number of people with different leadership roles, pilot studies, different cores, et cetera. But then in terms of the partnerships that we have, the partnerships are super broad. So they extend to hospitals, they extend to different parts of UB, different schools within UB. So that's kind of the larger Buffalo Translational Consortium that involves just many, many stakeholders.
All right, that helps. That helps. When you say hubs, I guess you just mean other centers that have
Yeah.
CTSIs.
You got it.
Gotcha. Okay. So my small question is, will this internal grants be able to fund students, undergrads and grad students, or it's strictly for data collection? Could we fund
you can pay people on the grant. You
Okay.
can't pay yourself
Right.
as faculty. So faculty don't get salaries, but if you have a graduate student that you are paying their salary, if you have a technician,
Right.
if you have a data manager, if you have a clinical research coordinator, again, it's not a huge amount of money, but it absolutely goes for personnel support.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That's it.
I put a link in the chat few minutes ago of the, when you go to our website and you click on the upper right service request, and I click that, and then that's the link I put in there. It's all our various cores for support. And we encourage you that as you're developing your LOI and as you're developing your full proposal, if you get invited to submit a full proposal, we encourage you to take advantage of the expertise in the cores, and particularly BIRD, the biostatistics, epidemiology, and research design. I think they often reach out to all the folks who've been invited for LOIs. And I'll tell you that people who consult the cores actually have better success in getting their pilot studies funded, particularly the biostatistics and research design part of it. So all those cores have capacity, and they are ready, willing, and able to help you in your design.
Just looking for anything new on the chat part or other thoughts. Okay. So, well, anyway, let me thank you all for joining us. Please feel free to email Tim any last minute points that maybe were not so clear or should be emphasized more.
I think let me just say one thing, and that's about the whole translational science thing. One way that you can do that, in other words, we all have our own research interests. You know, I'm interested in vaccine development, you know, and I'm not doing my research to try and, you know, get over the humps along the way towards vaccine development necessarily, but in fact, you are. I think we just don't know it to a certain extent, that those who are successful in doing translational research, like folks in this room, have solved problems along the way, just haven't done it in necessarily the most rigorous way. You say, oh, all right, that worked and this didn't work, so I'm going to do this from here on. So what you can do in proposing a translational science project is use your own work as a use case. You know, let's say I work on, one of the things I work on is vaccine development. Let's say I get to the point where I'm going to recruit people to a clinical trial. Well, I could do 2 different recruitment methods and then compare the recruitment methods to say, okay, for this population that I'm trying to recruit, you know, recruiting, you know, on social media is better than recruiting in other ways, and then compare them. So you can still do your work, but you also build in a translational science question. It's got to be a big part of it, though, and use your own work as a use case.
Okay, well, let me thank you all again for joining us. And Erin, again, thank you very much also for helping me out with the slides.
Of course.
Take
Take
care,
care, everyone.
everybody. Have a good day.